Hello and welcome back. Sean here, Mountains Garage on the beautiful, slightly crisp, windy Thursday here in the state of Maine. Late October. Just the other day I was sitting right here next to my beautiful black 55 Chevy 210 Sport Coupe. Some people call them Hardtops. And no, I did not go crazy and sand all the paint off it. The events of the last 48 hours astound even me, caught me completely off guard. But here I sit with another 55 210 Sport Coupe, or some people call them Hardtops. How did it happen? Well, it had to be a month ago. I saw this car on Marketplace. It was pretty expensive. It was in Massachusetts, almost to Boston. And I had no intention of selling any of my projects, my Novas at that time, or anything else. I was completely happy. Everything was going on. But I did save it to favorites. And then, you've heard the story, I went to buy a Bellhausen, ended up with a 55 Chevy, the black one, 210 Sport Coupe. Some people call them Hardtops. And that deal took place. I'm totally happy. I can drive it. Life is good. Tuesday morning, my son was already on the bus. My wife actually had to go into work, so I was taking an extended breakfast. And I went looking in my saved favorites in Marketplace, looking for a golf cart thought I had saved. And I ran across this ad again. Opened it up, it was still available. So just for kicks, I sent a message asking for more pictures because the pictures were terrible. Well, not necessarily terrible, let's just say they did not invoke you to be interested in learning more. There was no description as to what it was. To be honest, I didn't even know what I got until I got it home. But the pictures showed up a few minutes later, and I spent the next couple hours studying them and walked away, unsure if I wanted to go down this road again. And then I went back and studied them more in the evening, ended up contacting the guy, and I'd studied them to the point that I was willing to make a deposit even because my luck, I'd fall in love with it and somebody else would too. Well, that wasn't the case. He said nobody was pressing to buy it, apparently, did not need a deposit. We actually discussed the price and everything, which I rarely, if ever, do. I'm not the greatest negotiator. I typically see the asking price, and if I think it's worth it, probably buy it. Sometimes we negotiate. In this case, negotiations went back and forth, and I was more than happy at the price. The price was half what you would buy an aftermarket body for. That's pretty decent. So, as luck would have it, typically I go on these missions all by myself. I'm not fond of going south into Boston. You send me any other direction from my house other than that way, and I'm pretty happy. But I looked at the building it was in, a warehouse, on Google Earth. It was hard to tell if I was going in, to the center of a bad neighborhood, or turns out it was right downtown, a beautiful place. No issue there. So you never know how your imagination works. So, and thankfully, this never happens. My buddy had contacted me, a guy I went to school with, and offered to go. Well, he agreed to go with me. He didn't offer. I told him what I was up to, and he volunteered. And he worked really hard, but we'll get to that. So I had to swing by the bank, which took some backtracking, and in the conversations the night before, I told the guy with the car that about what time I'd be there, and I told him I would text when I left, which I did. We kind of got our wires crossed. I texted on Marketplace, and he was expecting a text on his phone. So when we arrived, what we determined was the correct location. I called him, and he was still 20 minutes to a half hour away, but he'd be on his way. So we hung around, and he showed up Took us inside the warehouse. This was in an unlit portion of it, up on wooden blocks in the corner, stuff piled on it. Been there 10 years, I believe he told me. So we threw the door open. I started looking it over, and I knew I was not going to back out of the deal just because the body was really nice, even though it's rusted. It one time was stripped completely. I'm looking at the lead where they leaded the seams. There's no Bondo. There's nothing to hide. And it's nice. You know, to the casual observer that saw the ad, it looked like a rusty car with probably a bad roll cage in it. So I got it loaded on the trailer, and during this process, because I thought it was all you get is what you see. And I was just complaining to my buddy who went with me that oftentimes I end up with project cars that you just know there's boxes of parts sitting next to it probably when whoever scooped it out of the place it was sitting. If they'd only, you know, a lot of times the people selling it don't necessarily know what goes with what. So, and this was the case yesterday. Super nice guy, but basically he said on the 3rd floor of the warehouse there was some car parts that probably go with it. There was a whole nother front end, including a hood, steel bumpers front and back, hardwood glass bumpers for the front and back still in the boxes, a set of headers, some trim stuff. I was fortunate to find like pieces that have been cut out of the doors, which I'll show you. They're up there in a box, so we made many trips because it was hanging from the ceiling on the 3rd floor, and each one was a halfway staircase, so it's like, what, 6 sets of stairs. But I got the car in the trailer, my Suburban absolutely packed with stuff, paid the man, and we were northbound. And when I head north, I get happy. When I head south, I get sad. But we were headed north, and we ended our way home, stopped for lunch, and I was fueling up the Suburban while my buddy went in to get lunch. And that's when I started looking underneath. Now, I have spent a good portion of nights, it's been a while, when I wanted to go top sportsman racing. Well, I might as well back up all the way. I built my first chassis in my parents' garage for my 70 Chevelle that I drove to high school. I put a roll cage in it previously, cut all that mess out. We stick welded in that one. And I built the tube chassis, learned how to weld on it. Wasn't the greatest, but I did my best because first time at everything. Car actually ran pretty good. I had it sitting nice and low, which I like. Sold the car. The guy crashed it. He lived. That's a good story. That was my first tube chassis experience, but it was only mild steel. And I put a big motor in it, and it twisted up like a swing set. I sold that, bought my house, messed with square body Chevys for a while, eventually started building. This was back in the early 2000s, and I have to blame Tom Vigu, 3V Performance, down in North Carolina. I stopped by his house to buy a set of wheels, and he gave me some of these fastest streetcar magazines because that was starting to be a thing. And I was hooked. The next thing you know, I'm building another car and another motor, another car. Sounds like I've been to Boston. People will comment on my accent. So, I built a mild steel chassis for a 69 Nova body. Ended up selling that because I was on the hunt, and this is my point in telling you all this, for a 6.0 cert chassis, which is typically made, or it is made out of 4130 chrome moly. And I searched and searched, and I almost bought, and I almost wish I did, a 79 Ford Fairmont Futura, like Bob Glidden had. It kind of looked like that. It had a professional built chassis, old, but if you were to have a professional 4130 double frame rail chassis built these days, it would cost a lot of money. I see like the No Prep King guys in 100, 125,000 is pretty much the norm. Now this is not that, but it's well on its way to being that. And I didn't realize that till I'm at the gas station looking under it. I could see it was all TIG welded, beautifully TIG welded. And a couple other pieces I could read, it said 4130 on it, but I just now dug out my sonic checker, which I acquired a few years ago. I didn't have it when I was shopping for my orange Camaro that I bought, which had a 6-second cert chassis, IHRA cert. It ended up failing the NHRA cert. My brother and I had to rebuild it. Took us 3 months, but I did make it usable again. I have the SFI paperwork from then. I need to get new SFI paperwork now if I go the direction this looks like it's headed. So what this is somebody, well, the guy selling it, it was his father's car who passed away, he said 8 years ago or 10 years ago. It was in the warehouse for 8 or 10 and he passed away 8 or 10 years ago. So they coincided together. And it was an unfinished project, but it was definitely far along and not built by a home hobbyist, I guarantee it. If it was, it wasn't his first car. I was clued in, staring at the pictures that the man sent me, by the tin work. I've done a lot of tin work, or in this case aluminum work, and it's hard. And this is all marked out in die. It has the big Zeus fasteners that are actually countersunk, every hole, it's bead rolled. I could just tell by the tin work, this thing was nice. And then I could see a lot of the welds were beautiful. It had strained struts in the front. I could see it had a 4-link and a 9-inch housing in the back. Couldn't see much more. So I'm under it at the gas station while my buddy's in getting lunch. I see it has a full floating rear end, which means, you know, instead of the weight being on the axle, it's like a 3/4 or 1-ton truck, only it's a race car version. And I know for a fact that that's the floating hubs and brake kit is almost $4,000 in the axles. It has a Hemi mid-plate. It says Hemi right on it. I could see the bolt pattern wasn't Chevy. It also came with a Chevy mid-plate. It came with the Mopar front plate even. So talking with the man that I bought it from, his dad had, he said it was a top fuel car. Most likely it was a blown alcohol car. And I'm pretty sure that's what was headed into this rig here. It has the transmission mount for a Lenco transmission that slides so you can service the clutch. Again, it has a full floating rear end. I'll show you the fuel cell. It's huge. It has a sender, so yeah, I believe he was planning on streeting it. It also has 2 seats. And it has a huge fuel tank, but it's got like dash 12, maybe even 16 outlets. So it has a funny car type throttle, which is off the double frame rail inside, and a cable right here that would go up to the injector hat. So I could guarantee you from my evidence that I'm looking at that this was going to have a blown Hemi, a Lenco, and when it was built, now the rear wheels are SFI spec, and they dated 1993. So this car was probably built in the early 90s. I'm impressed it has a rear sway bar. That, like my race car didn't have a sway bar. I added the sway bar in the late 2000s, so that became a thing. It's probably, obviously it was built into the car, but it impressed me that it has that, so that's good. Got a wishbone instead of a track locator in the back. It's sporting, again, the guy probably had a top alcohol funny car or dragster that has 17, 36, 16 rear tires on it, with room to put your hand on either side, just massive back there. That is a top alcohol or Pro Mod rear slick tire size. And I know they make a DOT version of that are hard to get right now, but someday I will need a set of those. So that's pretty awesome. I don't think I'll hurt the rear end. I got to put a center section in it, but I know how to do that. My race car had a Lenco right up until the point I took it out. I wish I kept it. If you ever get a Lenco transmission, never sell it. If I had it, it would be going into this, I think. Now it's a big, I mean, I build Turbo 400s. The one I took out of my twin turbo Nova sitting right over there, ready to go. That would make sense, and I'll probably do that. But I think it's cool that it has a clutch pedal. It has the mount for the Lenco. The hole was cut for the shifters to come through. Not finished. This car was never run, never finished. The chassis, again, I'm going to have to study the SFI paperwork. It's going to need the funny car cage. There is no Dorex. That was never finished, which is typical when you build a car. You do that last because you want to work around the tin work. And I'm guessing at the stage it's at, they were doing the tin work, so they probably would have gone in next. I have to make sure, again, it was built a long time ago, that I'm able to make it a current 6.0 or 6.5, so I think it's light enough to be 6.0. I have to check all the rules and stuff because it's been 10 years or so since I fixed my car. So But that's pretty exciting and completely unexpected. What are the chances that I would buy this much car? I was just fascinated by the body. I'm looking at it now. I mean, it's rusty on the top, but it's all bare metal everywhere you go. And we had to do some measuring off the black 55 hardtop this morning. This thing is chopped 2 inches. You can hardly tell. You can if you stare at it long enough, because hardtops have a different roof line anyway, so I didn't notice it till this morning that it was chopped. In fact, my buddy noticed it first. He says, we should measure that because it looks like it's shorter. So that's going to make windows a little more difficult, but I'm sure I'm not the first one to chop a 55 Chevy 2 inches. Pretty exciting. I'm going to shake you around and show it to you. But if you can tell, I'm blown away at what I got and all the extra pieces that came with it. So I think I've out-talked my beeper again, but we'll do a quick walk around. I apologize if the audio makes odd noises. It always does from this angle. Well, it has a used grill somebody paid $100 for. At least that was the asking price at the swap meet. Everything else in the car is strange engineering. The floater kit, the master cylinder, the front struts, brakes, etc. I'm going to assume that rack is either a stiletto or a strange as well. It has the rod ends on both ends, which is cool. I like that the steering arms have been reinforced. I don't believe that's original, but if you're going to street drive it, it's pretty common for those to break. Same goes for how they've reinforced the lower control arm mounts. That is above and beyond what you typically do on a race car. Another clue, this thing was headed to be street driven. I think I even have the correct springs, which is good. I don't have the calipers. It will haunt me forever knowing they might have been in the warehouse somewhere. The only saving grace is, I believe, if the guy that I bought it from finds them, he will let me know. This is a Mopar engine plate. It says Hemi on the other side. Incorporated into the chassis is more chances to catch the motor plate, which I may incorporate when I don't know if the Chevy plate has those or not. And both cases, the motor plate just sits right on top of the frame rail, so you can slide the motor back and forth, just like it would be in a funny car. That's what the guy was probably used to, or a dragster, whatever he had. And uses the front mount, just hose clamps to the frame rail, believe it or not. And this is unusual. I actually did this in the Chevelle that I built to run them this way, but probably because the motor plate was going to be maybe not tied into these, but we'll see in the future. I know the Hemi plate was not tied into those, so they probably did that on purpose. I had to look really close, but you can see where it is cut. My first clue, again, the dash, everything's beautiful. All the metal, this was all bare at one time. I'm passing you around the lift, so my apologies. I found these pieces. I said, why would they be cut out? And that's when we decided to measure from here to here, and we're 2 inches shorter than my hardtop that's up in the other garage. The steering column fortunately comes out because I need to shorten it, and this brace kind of scares me. It's too close to my leg and way overkill, so I'll probably shorten that up. Nowadays they shorten the column and have an extension on the quick release, so put it all on bolts, and I went to steer it to move it out, and this isn't actually turning the wheel. It's all hooked up from there down, but that quick release is not welded, so I'll open the door. The doors are beautiful. I'm glad they're steel. I thought they were fiberglass at first. And because it's a hardtop, it's with a postcard, it'd be a lot easier with a window frame to put a window in it. But in this case, this back window will probably be plexi. I'm not sure if I can do all glass. Well, that's a ways down the road, but it is half the dash. I have the rest of the dash outside in the Suburban. Like I say, all this tin work, this is where the Lenco levers would have been. Well, I assume it's a Lenco. I guess it could have been a Liberty, but no, I know with the mount it was a Lenco. I can tell by looking at it because I had the same mount in my other car. That's the throttle pedal I was talking about, which is actually comfortable. The pedal's not in a bad place. It echoes in here a little bit, but the seat bracket needs to be lowered. This guy must have been pretty small. I'm really crammed in there at the moment, so that'll have to be fixed. Here's the view from the passenger side. The tranny tunnel is huge, but every piece comes out. Same with over the forelink. All these pieces come out, which is good because I need to do lots of work. This is the little grease spots is where I did my sonic checking. Here and here. Oh, I got goo running down. I have to wipe that off, but I'll explain that process, but it's pretty simple. Cool, it has a passenger seat. If you're gonna build a 55 in my book, it ought to look like that. I'm not a gasser person. But, yeah, the quarter panels are beautiful. I think they've been replaced from here down, or that's a factory seam, I don't know. They have been stretched right there, which you have to do when you put that much rubber under it. Back here, this is the factory leading, I believe. They've all been stripped down. And when I open the trunk, well, let me get it open for you, hang on. Here in the trunk is this massive fuel tank with sender, return lines. Those are the outlets. I mean, by comparison, here's my hand. Battery boxes, both sides. If I had seen a picture inside the trunk, this is a total surprise to me until this morning. I dragged it home last night, unloaded it. Wasn't until this morning where I opened the trunk. My God, this was gonna be something back in the day. I assume those brackets are probably for struts to help hold up the deck lid. Right now I got a piece of wood jammed in there, but wow, massive. Under the back, it has 36, 17, 16 slicks. I don't believe they come any bigger. With room to spare. They used a 9-inch housing. It has floater axles and brakes, sway bar. It's got the good forelink with the big bars, big rod ends, but 5/8 bolts. Everywhere you look, it's just beautiful. The whole body bolts on, which is good because I need to take it back off to finish the chassis. In the pictures, it might look like a rusty old car, but the more I look, the more I like. All the metal is beautiful. You know, it's in the eye of the beholder because it's rusty, but man, oh man, it's cool. Nowadays, when they do the rear section, they do it a lot different than they did back then, but this will be fine for what I'm going to do. I kind of like how they tied the X together. Cool little headrest brackets, which I probably will have to modify or remove because I will lower the seat. We'll see. I may have to just move the column. We'll work on that. Even the quick release on the steering wheel is strange because they were a faithful, strange customer. Nothing wrong with that. I'm glad it does not have spindle mount wheels. You don't want that with something you got on the street, in my opinion. These tires were brand new. They still got the tags on. Kind of sad. The rears, again, are huge, but they've been run. They've been almost corded in the middle, which is typical of, well, it'd be typical of a top fuel car, but I find it hard to believe he had one of those, but I don't know. I'm going to do more research on the name. But yeah, more cool spare parts. The Chevy mid-plate is still out in the Suburban. We'll go look at the haul that came with it out there. These are the pieces of the doors that were cut off. The Mopar front plate. This is when I saw this sitting in the shop downstairs before I knew there was more parts. I'm like, hey, there's 50, 60 bucks at the swap meet right there. I wish I had two of them. This is my inexpensive sonic checker. I actually got from a buddy of mine. He only used it one time. Pretty simple rig. I got the protective thing out of it because they leave the batteries out of it, but you put the batteries in, you calibrate it. This is 4 millimeter thick. This measures in millimeters. so I have to convert to decimal. You put a little there's grease, and you put the coupler up against it just like they do on your chassis cert. The only difference is theirs probably reads in decimal, and mine is metric. So I'm coming up with just about .088. 083 is a spec on chrome moly, so it's believable. It's plus or minus 6,000, so it's thicker than it needs to be. Probably some inaccuracy in the tool or my conversion, so it's definitely 083, 4130 chrome moly. I came outside and the wind picked up. That's pretty typical, but glass bumpers, a couple fenders, the steel bumpers. That's the Chevy mid plate in there. Factory radiator support, the dash pieces. And there's an extra bonus, what I believe to be some coated headers for a Tri-5 Chevy that I hope are going to fit my 56 wagon. I'll let you know, but they're in the pile. So now we're still in this joyous day of discovery. Again, I've owned it 24 hours now, and every piece I look at, I'm still getting used to it. It was only a few weeks ago when I sold what would be my race Nova. I had a street Nova and a race Nova. And now I have a street 55 and a race 55, even though the race will be streetable. I'm going to continue on with this guy I was probably headed for. Not with a blown Hemi, but it'll have some kind of power plant. Maybe multiple ones. I mean, motor plates and headers, you can do whatever you want. Definitely have to have something that I can drive on the road. I'm a big fan of the drag and drive stuff. I don't know if I'll ever do that, but might be a good candidate for that. The only problem with that, if you roll up with a big tire, you got to go fast, because otherwise you're carrying around all that rubber for nothing. So nowadays, in the past, everybody put big tires on everything. Now, as you know, if you follow drag racing, you know, you got your small tire guys and your big tire guys, and this would probably look funny with a small tire on it. Anyway, this is a fun part. I'm glad to have this car. It is built beyond my skill level. I can finish it, and I always dream of starting over and building a chassis just like this, and maybe I'm a much better TIG welder now than I was before. But whoever built this was better than I am, and I'm just going to enjoy it from here on out like it was intended. Now, I will either have, if I cannot make the chassis meet the current search, which I think I can, but we'll see, without completely cutting it apart and starting over, I will have the most overbuilt 850 cert car ever made, or I'll be able to accomplish that. So, and that's, having the cert is only important if, you know, you're actually going to race it at a sanctioned track, which, if I was going to go that fast, I would. So I see a lot of cars being pulled out that were, you know, I've told you the story how they changed the spec on the tubing, and it made a lot of race cars junk. Well, I see those being pulled back out and being raced, you know, on the back half stuff in the street, on the street and stuff like that. And those cars have suddenly become valuable again because, well, they're cheaper than a real race car, and people are daring to run them. So anyway, that's a whole nother rabbit hole, but me, I'm just going to sit here and stare at it and enjoy it. And what happens next? Lots of dreaming to do first, but it's exciting, and that's why you get up in the morning. Hope you're having a good day. Thanks for listening to my story. If you got this far, I thank you. Talk to you in a few days.